Welcome to the Bioptimizers Awesome Health Podcast. And now here's your host, Wade T. Lightheart.
Want awesome health? How about doubling your energy? With our free Awesome Health course, you can get a new video and lesson every single day for 84 straight days. The course covers everything from optimizing your digestion, nutrient intake, correct health issues, including weight, skin, energy, immune system, and so much more. The course could easily be worth $200 or $300 for, and yet it's 100% free when you go to bioptimizer.com. That's bioptimizers.com. Once you're there, just enter your name and email to get the first 3 phases of the Bioptimization report. You'll get the report immediately and begin getting your video lessons each and every day from there on in.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. This is Wade T. Lightheart from Bioptimizers with another edition of the Awesome Health Podcast. And today we're going to talk about air quality as a missing link in our health. And for those who haven't done the 84 days and the awesome acronym that I use inside of that, I recommend that you do that. But the first thing that we start about for living long, living strong, living healthy, and your best life is air. And today we have an expert. His name is Michael Rubino, and he is a mold and air quality expert, environmental wellness advocate, and founder of Home Cleanse, a revolutionary company with the vision to end the worldwide health epidemic caused by poor air quality and toxic indoor environments. He is also president of Change the Air Foundation and host of Mold Talks podcast. Michael, welcome to the show.
Thank you. That was an awesome introduction.
Thank you. I think so many people are interested, especially our listeners, they're really interested in the health. You know, they're following a specific diet, they're doing exercise, maybe they're monitoring their hormones and blood sugar and VO2 max and their recovery and their HRV and their sleep quality and all these sort of things. However, very few people actually take a moment to think about the quality of their air and its impact on health. What are some of the things, maybe some quick information before we get into how you got into this, like some poignant points for people to consider when we're talking about the impact of the air they're breathing on their health and vitality?
First off, I mean, you highlighted some really amazing things, like the technological advances that we've had just in the last decade. I mean, we could literally track everything about our health. And, we do this in this quest to get healthier, right? To be the best versions of ourselves that we could possibly be. But yet, as you mentioned, we don't think about the 20,000 breaths that we take each day. I mean, you and I are breathing right now. Are either of us subconsciously saying, okay, I got to breathe right this minute? No, we're not. It's just automatic. So much so that we take it for granted. And air is invisible, right? So we just look through it. We don't look at it. And it's really interesting because when you look at disease, right? And pick a disease, look it up. Air is typically the greatest route of exposure. We learned that through COVID. We learned that through pretty much any sort of infectious disease out there. And when you look at it from that perspective, why don't we think about the air we breathe when it comes to our health? I mean, it's not even on our radar. And I said we take 20,000 breaths per day. What does that equate to? It's about
pounds, right?
Yeah, it's about the amount of gallons that you would see in a normal size swimming pool.
Right.
Right. So you can't go more than a few minutes without air. It is extremely vital to our well-being and our health. But yet we don't think about that.
So what got you so interested in air quality, and so much so that you decided that you would develop a company around air quality? How did you get involved?
So my dad has been in construction my entire life. When I'm 5 years old, he had his own contracting company in the New York area, and he did what's called fire restoration. So people have fires, unfortunately, and He goes in and he fixes that from the ground up and makes it so like the fire never happened. And of course, fires get put out with water, right? So mold typically takes shape in these places. And it's about Hurricane Sandy time in the Northeast. I'm moved back home from college. I'm working for my dad, and I'm kind of in the marketing department, and I'm going to door, get a little bit more understanding about the business. And what happened was the most remarkable thing. People started complaining of being sick in their own homes, and I'm probably 25 at the time, 24, 25, somewhere around there. I was the first time that I ever thought, how could someone's home make them sick? Never occurred to me before. And that's when I started to see this pattern of water damage, mold and bacteria, and illness, and all kinds of illness, right? And so I started developing this process, working with different labs and different inspectors, trying to understand what's the best way we can screen homes and test for homes and find problems that are even hidden, that you can't even see. Because that was the real tricky part about this, is a lot of the homes that I was visiting at the time, they were supposedly restored. The hurricane came, these companies came in and they fixed it and it looked like it never happened. And so I would walk in and it would look perfect, but yet they're complaining of illness, and they're showing me these lab reports by some mold inspection company that, there's mold there. And it was the most bewildering thing to me, until I realized one significant part is that the entire restoration industry, which is really, it exists because people have houses and they insure these houses and they have insurance claims and they need to be resolved. They are not doing it from a scientific perspective or from a health perspective. They're doing it to make it look like it's repaired. And visually and scientifically, these two things were not matching up. And so as I really started to understand, how do we test for this? How do we fix this? How do we test for it after it's fixed to prove that it's gone before we say this is done? And through that was born an entire process that's still in use today across the country, helping people create healthier environments.
It's fascinating. And I think you touched on something really critical, and that is when you purchase a home, you get sort of a report on it, but you don't necessarily know if there's mold inside it. And I saw a crazy statistic the other day, and you would probably be in a better position to confirm or deny this, but it was like almost half the homes in America have toxic mold inside them that people are breathing on a daily basis. Now, of course, that's a variance within that. Is that remotely accurate? Is that a wild statistic?
It's actually worse than that. So that statistic is based off the 1994 study. And unfortunately, that statistic is no longer accurate. So in 2019, most recently, HUD and the EPA did a joint study called the American Healthy Home Survey 2. So part 2, they did a part 1 back in 2006. Part 2 in 2006 showed us that there are some molds that were in the 80 to 90 percentile. In 2019, those molds went from 80 to 90% to some of them 97%, 100%. And we're heading in the wrong direction in the way in which we build and maintain homes. That I believe is the cause of these numbers increasing in prevalence. The prevalence is getting worse for sure. We went from 50% in 94 all the way to, some species 97, 100%. Now in 94, we didn't have the technology to speciate the way we do today. So this data will evolve over time. But yeah, it is, statistically speaking, there's a higher percentage chance that you will buy a moldy home at your next house than you will a less moldy one at your next house. And that is part of the big problem here.
Okay, so I've got a couple of questions now, because now I know our listeners are going to be thinking, holy doodle, this is crazy. Okay, so what is the impact of mold from a health perspective? And then how do we know if we've got mold in our house? And then I guess the third thing would be, is it fixable? What can we do about it? Or do we need to just move on? So you can start whatever order that you feel
Good.
relative there, because that's a lot.
So we'll start with a beacon of hope. It's all fixable. It's fixable for us as individuals. It's also fixable for us systemically as a civilization. And that part is obviously going to take some work and finesse. I think the first part is understanding that this is a problem. You know, how do you solve any problem? You have to first agree that it is a problem. And I'll tell you, I think it's a big problem. The second thing about it is, you know, how do we, let's talk about the impact, right? What is the impact? Well, that's going to vary from person to person. Let me give you a really good example. You and I may have gotten COVID and we would have totally different symptoms. Maybe it was the same strain, but maybe you lost your sense of taste and smell. Maybe I didn't. Maybe I was more, you know, flu-like symptoms. I was bedridden for a week. Everything was different. My wife and I both had COVID, and I could tell you, I was like dead in bed for 4 days, and she was up and about. She lost her sense of taste and smell, and I didn't, right? So we can have the same exact exposure, but have two completely different reactions in the same household, right? So that's really important to cover, because you would have a family of 4 with a problem, and you would see 2 people have, you know, wildly different reactions. The other 2 people might have just had some normal, you know, respiratory stuff, coughing, sneezing more frequently, but they weren't nearly as sick as these other people, which makes this so hard, right? Because Western medicine is it's very simplistic in the sense where if you have 67% of these symptoms or not, we're pretty confident you have this, right? And we have all these different baskets with labels on them. And this makes it really difficult, because if I understand, first off, 100,000 different species of mold exist and that we know of. And if I understand that certain exposures to certain species might cause certain sets of symptoms in certain sets of people, it's going to be really hard for a doctor to be able to diagnose people for mold exposure, right? And we have the same problem with bacterial exposure too, because if you have mold in your house, you also have bacteria in your house. They're both going to grow in the same locations from the same sources of problems. So we're seeing increases of staph infections and all these other gram-positive bacterial infections that come and exist in water-damaged homes from people too. So it adds to this layer of complication. And that's just the layer of complication of diagnosing people. If I have Lyme disease, for example, I may have a completely set of different symptoms with mold exposure than if I didn't have Lyme. But let's just talk about what is the impact. Well, obviously, respiratory infection, number one. There's things like aspergillosis, which is a potentially fatal respiratory infection that can be created by Aspergillus, which is a pretty common household mold, actually. We have mycotoxin illness, which is considered mycotoxicosis. That can happen from different toxins that mold can produce. We're going to see things like brain fog, chronic fatigue, and I'm naming things that, like, almost everything you can get can cause brain fog and chronic fatigue. So it makes it really hard to diagnose, right? You're also going to see like joint pain, skin issues, gut issues, because mold exposure, bacterial exposure, you can have dermal exposure, through the skin, and obviously inhalational as well, right? And so those are to name a few. Dr. Dale Bredesen's been doing amazing work on what's called inhalational Alzheimer's, if you haven't heard of that, and the early onset of dementia as well. And so we're still in the learning phase, because there is so many different types of mold. There is so many different types of exposure, right? Some of us are going to have more mold or less mold. And of course, there are so many different types of people, their genetics, epigenetics, immune system, etc., that it makes it very difficult. But one thing we do know and should know is that the air we breathe is vitally important to our health. And if we think we have a problem in our house, and statistically speaking, we might have some levels of problems, it's better to go and check and figure that out, because at least rule it out, right? And how do we rule that out? Well, the best technology is called the dust test, because it utilizes PCR technology. And what's so nice about it is I can go to all the different rooms in my house, collect dust, have it analyzed by a PCR machine. It'll tell me exactly how many particles for each individual species of mold or bacteria. And it can tell me, is this abnormal? Okay, how abnormal? Are we talking 10 times, 100 times, or even 1,000 times higher, right? And this can give us crucial information to be able to understand, is our home the problem, and where is it likely coming from?
Wow, that's pretty cool. How much would a test like that cost?
So $275 door to door, including shipping there and back to the lab and everything.
That's really inexpensive. Okay, so let's say someone goes out and gets one of these tests, and then they discover that in one of their kids' rooms, there's a lot of mold. What do they do?
Well, if you discover in one of your kids' rooms is a lot of mold, the first thing you want to understand is, how does that mold exist in the first place, right? Mold doesn't just, take shape in our home. It only grows if there's a problem that allows water to intrude, right? So first thing I'm looking for is my kid's window leaking? Is the roof leaking? Is there some sort of leak from the exterior wall coming in? Is there, some sort of water intrusion from the ground if it's on the first floor? What is happening? And you want to try to identify that first. And if you've got a good team around you, typically an inspector will kind of help identify some of those things off the right from the get-go. But sometimes you need to open up the wall and find out, right? The second thing that you're going to do is you're going to want to remove that mold safely and carefully so that it doesn't reoccur. Now, a lot of us grew up around this era where you just threw some bleach at it or you painted over it and it was no big deal. And what we're learning is that is a grave mistake. Bleach will bleach it. It will not kill it, and it will not remove it. And painting over it will not kill it either, and it will not remove it, and it'll just grow right through the paint. And I'm sure anyone who's ever painted over it 100 times knows exactly what I mean. So we have to actually reframe the way we look at it and say, there's a root cause here. Let's figure out what that root cause is, and let's remove it. And that unfortunately means sometimes cutting open walls and removing the insulation and cleaning it off the wood behind all of that, so that when it gets put back and fixed properly, we know it's gone. Because as long as it's there, it's creating particles. That's its way of reproducing. Those particles are entering our body 20,000 times a day. And if we have a lot of it in our environment, it's going to make an impact.
That's good advice. Now, if you're purchasing a home, is these type of inspections typical?
Well, they should be typical, but are they typical? No. So if I become a home inspector tomorrow, I would probably have to read and study about 800 different pages of all the things that you would look for in a home. There's only one page on water damage and mold. One page out of the 800. There's a lot of focus on, check the date on the water heater and look at the HVAC and, assess how old it is and look for, cracks and things, structural issues, which are all good stuff, right? We need to know that stuff. And that's why we pay for these inspections to be done. But we're missing a major portion on attention to detail on water damage, where they're not required to do any testing, for mold and stuff like that. And often they don't. So we're missing part of the information that would greatly affect our health. And that's why it's really important when you're buying a house, do a dust test, hire an actual mold inspector. Because I mentioned earlier, we care about bacteria too, but mold's the easiest thing to find. And if we find the mold, we're going to find the bacteria too. So we kind of kill two birds with one stone. I think we need to have more emphasis on mold inspections when we're buying homes, because very few people know to do that.
Now, if you're in a situation, for example, you're down in Florida, they get a lot of storms that can cause water damage. Let's say that you don't have mold in your house, but you've sustained some water damage from some sort of event. Somebody left the bathtub on, a water pipe broke, or you were subjected to a storm. What are some of the actions that you would initiate right off the bat if you were in a situation as a homeowner where you suffered water damage?
So first thing I would do is clean up the water. That's step one, right? So water damage can come in many different forms. It can be a full-on flood where you need like pumps to pump the water away as quickly as possible, or you could have just some dripping and water dripping that comes in. The amount of water matters, because if I have tons of water, I'm going to need to pump it out, dry, vacuum it up, whatever. I need to get the water out of the situation. That's step one. Step two, I need to remove the materials that got wet, because if I do that, I'm going to have a good shot at drying it out quickly. Mold can start to grow in 24 to 48 hours. So if I catch it in the same day, I have a pretty good shot at making sure that I don't have any mold after, which is really good. But that's going to mean that I need to do some legwork to make sure that materials are not trapping moisture. So let me give you an example. I got a wall leaking, okay? I am going to remove the drywall on that wall where it's wet. And, some people have this school of thought where just throw a dehumidifier at it, you'll be good to go. The problem with this is if you ever taken a water mitigation class, you would learn the average time it takes to dry out a wet wall is 3 to 5 days with a dehumidifier running. Now, I just said mold starts to grow in 24 to 48 hours. So that's 1 to 2 days. 3 to 5 days it takes to grow. That means that I already have mold by the time the structure is actually dry. So I don't want to be behind the 8 ball. I want to be in front of it. So if I cut the drywall out and take the insulation out, yeah, it sucks. I have to patch the wall. I got to paint it. It's a pain. I understand that. But you know what's more of a pain? Getting mold in that wall. And you know what's even more of a pain than that? Getting sick because of the mold in that wall. Right. So for my health's sake and for my, my peace of mind, listen, I know too much already about this stuff for my own good at this point. I'm opening up that wall and making sure it's fully dry. And that's how I know for sure that I'm not going to have a mold issue.
And now for a Bioptimizers fixed digestion tip, rapid cheat meal relief. Research shows that cheat meals can actually be an effective way to boost your metabolism. One key weight loss hormone, leptin, can be increased by up to 30% following a cheat meal. The challenge with the cheat meals is that all those extra calories and lower food quality can be hard to digest, which means you could be totally sidelined with a food coma after big cheat meals. The solution is to take strong digestive enzymes like masszymes, which will help rapidly digest and break down the extra food. 3 to 5 capsules before or right after your cheat meal can make a huge difference in how you feel following the cheat meal. If it's a cheat day with multiple large meals, you might want to go up to 10 capsules or higher to help you power through all that food. To save 10% on masszymes, go to masszymes.com. That's MASSZYMES.com and enter the code CHEAT10 at checkout.
So another question that comes to mind, if you were to say build a house, what type of materials are more susceptible to mold and which ones are less susceptible to mold? So if you could start over again in the new housing startups, how would you construct houses to be more resistant to mold?
That is a great question. So first off, I think the answer to that question will depend on the geography that the house is located in, right? Because we have to build for the location our house is in. The way I would build a house that rains, 90% of the year versus the way I would build a house maybe in the desert in Arizona would probably be a little bit different, right? But let's just say I build in a normal climate where, it rains sometimes, it's sunny sometimes, it gets cold sometimes, gets hot sometimes, just a standardized climate. I would either build with, concrete and metal if I had the pick of the options, because if I have wood, it's semi-porous, it could absorb some moisture. So, that would be a better option. So I don't have anything, porous on the framing side of things. I would build with concrete, just because it's got some depth to it. It's going to dry out pretty well if it does get wet. And I can waterproof the layers properly with the adhesion to the concrete and make sure there's a proper drainage path. Mm-hmm. The other thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure, here's where people get really, messed up. I've seen new construction homes with mold problems like you wouldn't believe. And the number one problem that these builders make It's not even really the builders, it's the builders' material companies. They deliver the wood to build the house and it sits in the soil.
Yep. I've
You
seen
know
that
what's
so many times.
you know what's abundant in the soil? Mold and bacteria. So we sit in the soil, it rains, the wood gets wet, mold and bacteria are already in the soil, they transfer onto the lumber, and you see mold all over the place. And I've unfortunately had the luxury of testing some of these framing members that were then built into homes, and they had off the charts levels of mold, and not just, the non-scary stuff, but some of the toxic molds that you hear about too, that we know are toxic themselves. Plus they produce toxins, right? That's not something that you want to have in a brand new home. It's supposed to be brand new. I'm not supposed to have these problems. The other issue that I see with these homes is they'll have the vapor barrier and they'll either do it poorly. They'll have all these pipes and stuff protruding from it and they won't well seal it. And then you'll have moisture into the slab. Again, I've seen brand new homes where there's moisture, there's literally water stains in the slab from moisture seeping up into the slab. They're right where the pipes are, so you could tell right away that's the problem. They didn't seal around the pipes. And then they're putting wood floors on top. Now, what do you think is going to happen? That moisture is going to seep from the slab into the wood floor, and you're going to have mold growth. And I can go into developments in Florida specifically, where you walk into these brand new homes and you get smacked in the face with mold, and you're like, oh my goodness, this is not supposed to be that way. I live in Florida, by the way. My house still smells like it's a new house, and you don't smell an ounce of mold in here because I kind of built with these things in mind when I renovated this house and moved myself and my family into it. The other thing with new construction that's really problematic, besides the things I've already mentioned, is this whole energy efficiency phase of building that we're in. Energy efficiency is great, but you have to think about the people living inside these energy efficiency homes. Now, when we think about energy efficiency, what are we looking at? We're looking at heat loss and we're looking at cooling loss, right? So if our buildings stay cool when we want them cool, then it's going to cost us less energy to make it cool. Same thing for heating. The problem is that the way in which we make these buildings stay cool is we spray foam pretty much the entire building. Okay. But the entire building, every building should have some ventilation. We spray over any possible spots of ventilation. So we want no air exchange from inside to outside. So we now live in balloons, is what I'm saying. And living in a balloon, when you do have a water damage problem, now we have higher levels of mold and bacteria that we will be breathing in. And this whole energy efficiency kick has been going on since the 1970s. Richard Nixon's president, and we're dealing with a global energy crisis, right? So that's how long we've been going in this direction, just for everyone's clarity. Now, we're living in a balloon. We have mold and bacteria, so we're breathing in more per breath that we take, 20,000 times a day. Why are we breathing in more? Because we have no ventilation, which means we have no dilution of air, right? So that means you're breathing in a higher concentration of particles. But it doesn't just stop there, because we're human beings. We are one of the largest hosts of bacteria, viruses, toxins that you could ever imagine. So as we breathe out, we're also expelling bacteria into the environment, expelling virus particles into the environment. And again, we're in a balloon, so we're just recycling and breathing that stuff in. But then we have chemicals. We have household chemicals we use to clean stuff. It never really dissipates. We have cooking. We cook and all that stuff evaporates into the air and all these particles get all over the place. So you see, we've created gigantic petri dishes for us to live in. And unfortunately, now we have to go back and course correct all of this stuff. And the good news is we can. There's technologies like ERV systems and stuff that can start bringing in fresh air. But the problem is that we went down this path for 50 plus years and we didn't think about it until 50 years later.
So someone's living in a home. They have a moderate amount of mold. It's not life-threatening at this point. They're in one of these balloon houses. what can they do to mitigate the problems if they're not suffering from water damage, but they might, or extensive kind of like, is there air quality control mechanisms a person can use, or on a preventative side, or as a maintenance side, or as an interactive side? What are some options? Or
Yeah, I
is
mean, look, I think the goal is always figure out where the problems are and fix them, right? I mean, that's always the goal, because then you're not constantly creating particles that you have to filter out or clean or whatever. But, let's say you're renting and you're in a crappy situation, you can't get out, you can't fix the problems because it's the landlord's responsibility. Or you're in a house, but money's tight right now. Maybe you just lost your job and and you're spending more time at home than ever before, but you're sick and you can't get a job because you're not feeling well. You need strategies to be able to live, right? And I think ventilation is going to be probably one of the biggest keys. You're going to want to open windows. You're going to want to get fresh air in. You're going to want to dilute the amount of particles that are entering with every breath. When it's wintertime, or if it's super hot out and it's very humid and we don't want to add humidity to make the problem worse, what can we do? Well, we need things like dehumidifiers, because if we have a high humidity environment and we know we have some mold issues, that mold is going to grow and become worse if we give it too much moisture content in the air. So we might need things like dehumidifiers. That'll make a big difference, and it'll actually slow mold's ability to reproduce at that point too, because it needs moisture content. We also are going to want to clean our environments much more thoroughly than we typically would, and probably much more frequently than we typically would, because as these particles aerosolize, they also settle in our dust. And if you've ever sat near a window on a sunny day, you'll know exactly what I mean when I say our dust is everywhere. So the more we remove our dust, the more we're removing these particles with it, right? So dusting is extremely important to our health, in case anyone didn't realize that already. The other thing that we would probably want to do is maybe invest in some air purifiers. Now, air purifiers are probably one of the most confusing topics that anyone could ever have, right? Because
Sure is.
everybody says they're the best.
Yes.
And, this company says they're the best and they're thousands of dollars, and this company says they're the best and they're hundreds of dollars. Who's right? Who's wrong? I'm going to clear this confusion up in one very small sentence. You want the machine that can remove the smallest particle possible. You get that one, because it is really dependent on the filter technology, not, the Wi-Fi connectivity and, all these different bells and whistles that it has. This one puts out hydrogen peroxide in the environment. You don't care about any of that. You care about who can remove the smallest particle possible, and you get that one at the price that you could afford. Because look, we all have budgets, right? Get the smallest particle possible for the budget that you can afford, and that is what you want to get.
That's great. So if you were to, let's talk about your company a little bit. Do you want to talk a little bit about what your company does and how it works, and how people interact with you when you're in? I guess I'll just let you do the speaking on that.
Sure. Yeah. So 2017, I spun off from my dad and started my own company, and it was called All American Restoration, because I bought an existing company called All American Waterproofing. And it was, I'm a bootstrapping guy. I was like 3 guys in a truck, and we just hit the road and wanted to help people. Well, when you do good work in anything that you do, you popularity around what you're doing grows. And so we went from, 3 guys in a truck to, multiple trucks to, hey, we need you in Florida, to, hey, we need you in California. And got to the point where we had to start opening multiple offices and helping people across the country. Today, we are nationwide. And we also started helping people in other countries too, mostly through consulting and stuff. So the name All American Restoration didn't make sense anymore. We rebranded to Home Cleanse just a few years ago. Our company uses science to understand your environment, and then scientifically removes the contaminants that we find in your environment, and then proves it with post-testing, as we call it, all through third-party testing, because I don't want to prove my own work. I want to prove it to you, and you hire your person to do that. So that is, in a nutshell, how the process works. But we work with over 250 doctors across this country, and help people who are really struggling, who the doctors suspect that they might be dealing with environmental exposures. Environmental medicine is not a big field, unfortunately. Many doctors, when they go through med school, there is some understanding that you can get illness from the environment. But a lot of med school is really focused on all the anatomy of the human body and all the different things that you'll need to do as a general practitioner, right? The environmental medicine field is rapidly growing because doctors are seeing how much the environment actually does play on the human body. And we fit right in there because essentially, if you're living inside the problem, how can you heal, right? And all 250 doctors, what they've seen is their patients recover more rapidly to medical treatment when the environment that they're in is no longer posing a threat. And so it's been a really amazing journey. We have some amazing stories that if we have time, I would love to share. But watching people's transformations going from, severe illness to acute illness to getting better, being healthier, happier, and living a better quality of life, that has really kept me going, because it's not easy to grow a nationwide company by any means, but, seeing the success of individual people and families and getting better, it tells me and that I'm on the right path here and that this is an important piece of what I do.
So based on that, just as an example, somebody hears about you, says, hey, I think I might have mold. They give your company a call. What happens? And then what can you do? I'm assuming you go and do a test. You get the test results. It says it comes back mold. Now, do you go in and actually then go and fix the problem with your team and all that sort of stuff? Is that how that all works?
Yeah. So let's just say you just called me, right? And you're like, I think I have a problem. I'm not sure. My doctor sent me over to you, whatever it may be. The first thing I would ask you is, did you do any testing yet of your house? And did you do any testing yet of your body in relation to the environmental exposure you think you're having? Because what's really cool about this is you could actually correlate molds and bacteria that you find in someone's home with molds and bacteria that you find in their body, which is remarkable.
That's cool because now you've got a correlative.
Now we have correlative data, and we've been collecting data over the years so that we can, give that to the EPA and give that to HUD and let them see what we're seeing, right? But right now, I would ask you if you had testing data. If you said yes, I would ask you to send it to me. We would review it together, and I would give you my thoughts, which obviously would be unique because your unique problems that your house have wouldn't be the same problems somebody else has had, right? If you didn't have any data, I would walk you through the steps of getting the data, right? So I'd say, go buy the dust test. Let's just see what it looks like. And we'll look at that data and we'll look at your body's data and see if there's some correlation. And if there is, we can, advise on how to move forward from there. If you think that it's worth investing in finding problems in your house and fixing them. And if you are on that step, we would refer you to testing companies. We work with some of the best in the country that really know their stuff, that know how to find problems, that know how to test for them, and know how to get you the data you need to make the decisions on improving your environment. We would take that report. We would come out to your house. Using that report, we would write up a scope of work of all the things that we could possibly do for you to improve the environment. I think what's so unique about our company and the process that I helped develop for this is the fact that, we all have been through some sort of insurance claim, I would imagine, at some point in our lives, whether it was us, our parents, whatever. Something leaks, this company comes in, they tear a bunch of stuff out, they put it back together. It's like, 4 weeks later, it's like it never happened again, and we move on. Well, scientifically, there are so many things that happen when we have these leaks, and we just don't identify them to make sure that we fix them once and for all. And so it may look like it never happened, but scientifically you could prove that it happened and there's something there. We want to remove that proof,
forensics, right? The forensics.
Yeah. It truly didn't happen if forensically, when you test for it, the results look like they're in normal ranges again, right? And so that's kind of the goal in which we look at. And it's not just that. I mean, unfortunately, mold and bacteria, they're pretty insidious. Viruses, pretty insidious. I think we instinctively know this, right? But it's worth mentioning because if I have mold or bacteria or viruses in a modern home, that stuff is getting sucked into the HVAC. Our HVAC constantly condensates. So it provides a good breeding ground for mold and bacteria and every microbiological contaminant to grow and breed and
Yep.
unfortunately replicate itself. And that's how it starts to affect our totality. So when we look at, okay, I got mold in this wall, good. Well, you had mold in this wall. Now you have mold in your HVAC and you have mold in your toilet tank across the way because that's a reservoir of water. And so we look at things from a totality, right? How do we improve the air quality of the home in totality? And that's, I think, what makes us so unique. We're not just this, tear out and run, type of company and see it never again. We create, lifelong clients, educate them through improving their air quality and help them with products and services that they need going forward.
So I guess the next question is, how do people find you? Where do they go? How do they find out more information to get tested, checked, and hopefully corrected so they can live a healthier and better life?
Yeah, go to homecleanse.com. That is like the hub. If you go there, you'll find a bit about me. You can go to my personal website if you need more information about me or books I've written or podcasts I've been on and all that fun stuff. And, on Home Cleanse, you'll also find the dust tests and resources. You could call us and talk to human beings and ask questions and help guide you on your journey. And that's why we built that hub for.
That's so cool, Michael. We'll put all that in the show notes. Before we go, is there anything that you'd like to share with us that we haven't covered in our podcast?
I just want to emphasize 20,000 breaths per day. You consume enough air to fill up a normal size swimming pool. You are breathing in hundreds of millions of particles a day. It's time to be cognizant of that, to be aware of it, because anything that you are aware of, you can then thereafter be in control of it. And I think air is this, it's second nature. We do it automatically. This whole breathing thing, we see through air. We don't look at it, right? So it's never on our mind or on our radar. After helping thousands of people with all kinds of crazy, mysterious illnesses that ended up being, either exacerbated or caused by environmental exposures. I just like to say that if you are not where you want to be health-wise, check your environment. You could be ruling it out, which is great, or you might be finding a smoking gun, which is helpful. So I hope everybody learned a little bit today.
This has been great, Michael. And for those who don't know this, for many years, the team that I work with does an extensive lifestyle and home observation about chemicals, toxins, and air quality is one of them. But your explanation of that today was extremely thorough, and even better, you have a way of solving many of those problems from a building side of things. And I think that's really valuable. And many of the doctors and naturopathics, doctors that we work with in Bioptimizers are excited about this technology. They'll be happy to hear that there's a solution that people can go get their home fixed up and breathe the best air possible. So thank you for taking the time and joining us today. Really appreciate it.
Yes, and thank you for having this amazing platform to have people like myself on to talk about different aspects of health. It's very important.
And for all our listeners out there, if you like this, please give a thumbs up or a share with someone you know if they're suffering from some sort of conditions that no one needs or seems to know how to figure out. You just might transform someone's life. That's what we're all about here on the Awesome Health Podcast. I'm Wade T. Lightheart from Bioptimizers. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you on the next episode.
And now for a Bioptimizer's fixed digestion tip: how to get away with eating sugar. Hey, look, sugar is normally one of the worst things for you. But let's be honest. I mean, we all cheat from time to time. And here's a little trick that will ensure your body benefits from the sugar. Now, before you eat or drink anything sweet, take 5 to 8 capsules of P3OM. The patented strain in the formula devours sugar so fast it literally doubles in the body every 20 minutes in the presence of sugar. That doesn't mean that you can or you should eat a bunch of sugar or sit around all day doing that. But on the days that you do cheat, or you go after one of those maybe meals that you wouldn't normally do, this ensures that you get something in your gut that eats the sugar. And it's not going to feed the bad guys or spike your blood glucose nearly as much. So to learn more about P3OM and its sugar-devouring and protein-digesting properties and how it can transform your gut and metabolism, go to www.bioptimizers.com.
Thank you for listening to the Bioptimizers Awesome Health Podcast. You can find more information at bioptimizers.com.